So, tonight we have the main order of business is to talk about the Master Parks Plan. See the presentation. Welcome the members of the Master Parks Plan Study Committee here. We're grateful that you here tonight and that we have a chance to discuss this and comment on it during this council. Appreciate it very much. The other agenda item which will follow is some updates on our long-range planning projects, which include recodification, use information and feedback staff, and also we have update. I only have 2 items to update you on. First is our schedule for next year. I'm going to pass out a proposed set of dates. And I'd like you all to consider these so that in December, if you see any conflicts, let us know. Discuss dates. The second item I have is just to let you know we do have land development subdivision application. It's a subdivision where avenue like hard copy. I do have the digital copies, which I will email to you all. Now, give engineers. Well, you can hear, yeah. That will be on our okay. And the second one is boy, that would be a record. Approvals are October minutes, which were just distributed today. So I'm just going to ask if it's okay if we table that next month. So just October and our just got a little too eager. All right. So with that, are there any other announcements or updates? So, that will move on to the next one. Hopefully, is the presentation of yes. Now it's going to be yes. Is that right? Okay. So, we will turn it over to you.
Is there a way I can advance, or I'll just say next? Just say next. Yeah, go ahead next. Thanks for having me here. I'm Sarah Leeper with Simone Collins Landscape Architecture, and my colleague Bill Collins is here as well. We both worked on the Station Square project, and then have carried it over. I've been working on this with the borough. Our project started back in April. We've had an extensive public outreach as we've looked at 3 of the borough's 4 parks. We've been looking at Narberth Park, Elm Grove Park, as well as Station Square. And so throughout the process, we've had, and we go to the next slide, a series of public meetings. You can see our first public meeting was a brainstorming meeting on the 29th. We had about 25 people attend. We had a public visioning survey with over almost 800 responses, which is a really great response rate for such a small community. We did a series of 15 key person interviews with various associations and clubs throughout the borough, as well as held 3 stakeholder meetings. We've met with the annual park users, young parents and families, as well as had a specific key person or stakeholder meeting just on Station Square itself. All these were very well attended from the groups we were trying to reach out to, and really gave us good insight on the initial concepts we had generated for each park, which you'll kind of see those tonight. And then our most recent public meeting, we looked at refined concepts for each park site. We had 92 people in attendance. It was a great session. We went for about 3 hours. We got a lot of feedback. So what we've done is we've worked with the committee since that meeting to incorporate that feedback into a draft plan. That is what we're presenting to you tonight. This draft plan will be formalizing a report that goes along with the draft plan, and that will be presented to the Borough Council in December. And then we're going to have a public review period where we get feedback on that plan, and then the final plan wouldn't be adopted until January. So what you're seeing tonight isn't necessarily the final iteration of any plan. We're really just looking for feedback from the Planning Commission for this process. We'll kind of focus in on each. First, we'll kind of look at the overall vision statement. Yeah, there we go. Sometimes so we did kind of work within the vision statement that was put out by your request for proposals, and we've kind of worked with the committee to hone this down a little bit. But the key is really to kind of look at a plan that addresses the needs of all abilities and all ages within your park system, as well as kind of looking at how we make connections to your park system, how we develop resiliency and kind of environmental sustainability into your park system. So that's kind of what we're trying to encompass in this vision statement. Right, so this is just looking at the 3 parks. Sabine would be a future plan once the actual land is identified. So with Elm Grove, we looked at 2 initial concepts. I'm not going to go into detail of these initial concepts, but they're based off of the analysis mapping we did for each site. Here we were just kind of exploring ideas of how much of the site should be given over to kind of naturalizing the stream banks versus like what different recreational activities people want to see within the park. With Elm Grove, we really see this as an opportunity to be kind of a passive place. Obviously, it's a very small site. It doesn't have great vehicular access. So it really is kind of a walking destination where you might get a little piece of nature within the borough. Next. Based on the feedback we got from these initial concepts, we did develop a refined concept that is one and the same with the draft plan, and we'll kind of go through the components of this draft plan. One of the big concerns here that we heard throughout the process was just safety and creating a separation from Windward Road. So what we're kind of proposing there at item C is a 10-foot verge and then a nice generous, maybe 8-foot wide sidewalk that would be separated from the road. There's the potential that we could, maybe in future planning initiatives, connect down to Short Ridge. So this would kind of set that language of having that wider regional trail. So that's kind of what's happening there along the road's edge. And then also within that verge, having a fence and some shade trees in that area as well to start to really create a visual and physical barrier between the road and the park itself. At B, we kind of have the idea of a trail coming into the park. We're kind of showing everything being a meadow habitat. We did work with an ecologist to kind of look at each site and make recommendations. And her feeling here was that from a management point of view and ecological value, reestablishing meadow here was more important than trying to reestablish a forest system for a lot of reasons, and one just being the invasive management. You're always going to have invasive vectors with the kind of contributing to the site based off of the railroad right-of-way as well as the stream. So that meadow, once established and kind of maintained seasonally, gives you a way to manage those invasives very effectively. So the idea is that golden area becomes meadow with a path going through it that brings us down to kind of a central lawn area F. So this is a place where we can have informal gathering, some picnic tables throughout there so that people can kind of maybe have a small little family picnic within the site. At G, we're proposing a outdoor playground. So this is a nature-based playground of maybe mostly found materials. So we're talking about logs, maybe a natural teepee, things like that. But then also we wanted to look at the opportunity to do some bouldering climbing. So that might be a manufactured product that would still fit within that natural nature-based play kind of feel, but allow for a safe kind of climbing experience for younger kids. At J, we're looking at kind of restoring the borough side of the stream. We do need to revise this map just slightly. Just so you understand, the property line between the park project and the neighboring project is down the center line of the stream. So again, working with the ecologist, it is feasible just to do a stream bank restoration on the one side of the stream. So we can account for how we want to maybe create some little wetland ponds, things like that, and naturalize that one side that would still have a great impact on your stormwater management for both the borough in terms of an MS4 approach, as well as just with stream health as well, and kind of taking sediments out of the stream through just restoring the one side. One of the things that we will identify in the report is that, you know, the borough should have conversations with the property owner to see if they're interested in doing a restoration to both sides. That gets a little more complex, but it is something that should be explored. But so what you're seeing is kind of the idea of a little stream bank restoration and then improved kind of wetland riparian zone with a small boardwalk that would go through that at I. And then that boardwalk would terminate at H at kind of a shade platform, which would serve as like a small shaded pavilion area for an outdoor classroom or just a small program event that might be focused on nature studies within the site. That trail then continues down and then rejoins the walkway trail at K, and then we've kind of proposed a new bridge location for an improved bridge that would be ADA accessible, connecting over to Elmwood Ave, and having kind of a single ADA parking spot there at the end of Elmwood Ave. And one of the things we want to look there is, you know, there's a lot of road that kind of ends up in Elmwood. If we can start to pull back some of that pavement that maybe isn't needed to create more of a riparian buffer again between the end of Elmwood Ave and the creek itself. So that is most of Elm Grove. We'll just kind of keep moving forward and answer questions at the end. Station Square, as a starting basis for Station Square, we did use the 2022 Square the Circle plan. In this plan, this really identified all the major multimodal kind of connections in terms of stairs, getting people up and down the platforms, as well as ramps kind of to the underpass. Started to explore how we address vehicular movements through the plaza and parking as well. I will say at our last public meeting, parking was a really big topic that came up. We had shown a concept plan that was very similar to this, with some recreational amenities that we've added, and people were really wanting to see some of the parking. I think we have about 15 spaces in all of this circle right now, that we incorporate some level of parking in the plan moving forward. So if you want to go next, we do have a draft plan that kind of looks at revising that slightly to get parking in. So we'll kind of go through this one by one. One of the things I do want to say, as we looked at Narberth Park and Station Square and kind of start to look at the proposed greenway, mainline greenway, where the preferred alignment is coming down Haverford. Prior planning, we'd always looked at there being a contraflow lane on Haverford Ave to get bikes from the park into town. One of the things that we started to discuss through this plan is what happens if we reverse the one-way direction of Haverford Ave and then let Windsor be a one-way pair with it. So in both of these plans, Station Square and Narberth Park, we kind of look at what that looks like when you start to change those directions. Obviously, traffic study has to be done to identify the feasibility of that and kind of identify how far you would take that one-way pair into the downtown core. But here, the advantage that it gives for us is it allows us to take back that contraflow lane and allow the bike to be the lane bike path here. So you kind of pick up that area where now you can have a drop off for the train station at M, which would be on the passenger side because cars are moving the opposite direction now. And it also allows us to pick up some parking back in front of the State Store. So we get those kind of 4 spaces picked up there because we no longer have the need to give up room to a bike space. We have more room for parking. And it also allows us to narrow the cross widths for the crosswalks kind of coming across the street as well. So again, it kind of, in some ways, adds to the overall pedestrian prioritization of the concept. The other major change we've made is, again, with the change of one-way, now the driveway becomes an in coming into 230, and then the out would be up at the light. So again, all of this has to be studied more in depth at a traffic engineering level, but there's a lot of things that it kind of starts to make sense when you look at reversing the directions. So what we've done is we've added another 7 parking spaces along that one-way drive coming in at N, and then we've started to kind of, cut into the plaza a little bit, but you still have a pretty generous plaza area in the middle there. We've looked at kind of the idea, and again, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves because I think this warrants a pretty, not an intense architectural study, but its own architectural study in terms of what a shade canopy would look like at the train station, but that canopy would serve both the train station but also be kind of a canopy to the stage itself. So at E, we're kind of showing just a slightly elevated stage. We're talking about 18 inches above grade. That can serve as a sitting area during the day, but it also becomes a performance area when you have an event going on in the plaza itself. Coming off that stage are just some lawn tiers to kind of bring some skate green space into the plaza for informal seating throughout the day. And then you have your formal plaza area with shaded tables, and then your kind of tree plantings on either side that would work as stormwater retention areas as well, with benches. We do have 2 areas of bike, one kind of at I along the State Store, and then another covered area at H for all weather conditions. That was something that was brought up as key moving forward. I think that's most of the components of this plan. Really, the idea here is the recreation is the programming. You guys have such an extensive program in terms of all your races and parades. The farmer market's been really successful. They were very active in kind of giving us feedback on what should be in the plaza. So really, there weren't a lot of facilities that people needed, more just the spaces to have things. And just considering things like having a permanent stage with the electricity run to the stage that they need so that you don't have to store something off-site and bring it out every time you need it, but making sure it functions for day-to-day use as well. It's really kind of the focus of how we looked at the plaza. So last, we'll kind of go to Narberth. So early on, we looked at 3 initial concepts. And this was really, we knew none of these were going to be a final design by any means, but it was a way to kind of put a value on space in the park. This is a very well-used park. I think every time we had another meeting or another conversation, we heard about a different sports team that uses the fields. So, when you have a large field out there, it's not a baseball field. That is a true multi-purpose field that gets used throughout all the sports seasons. We also just wanted to kind of understand an appetite for change within the park. Whenever you're working with an existing park, it's really hard to kind of think about how things might change in the park. So that's where we were kind of exploring things with this concept. Concept 3 was we were kind of tasked from the RFP to look at the idea of what happens if you start to daylight the stream. Today, the East Indian Creek branch is piped under the park, which I'm sure you're all probably somewhat familiar with. It is not a small culvert. It's about 11 feet tall, if I'm correct, Bill? Yeah, it's a very large culvert. So it's large enough that you can tube through it. I've heard people have big.
Once upon a time, the rite of passage in Narberth.
Yeah. So one of the things was to re-envision what it'd be like if you were to daylight that street. So we did an initial concept just to kind of explore that based off of what a natural floodplain would kind of look at. So we were given a width by our ecologist to kind of model it after. And so what you start to see is that it does start to cut into the size of the playing fields. Maybe you no longer get a football field out there. It's even questionable. I think if the 90-foot field would work with the stream daylighting. And then, with this was just a concept. We took it one step further. We met with DEP and kind of had their joint permitting. They'll do an informal meeting with you just to kind of talk about conceptual projects. And they're kind of like, oh, well, this is a good start, but you're really going to need this much more space. So it was even more than what we're showing here. And then they brought up the really good point that I think we all knew this somewhere in the back of our heads, but we didn't think through it. To build this, you have to divert the stream elsewhere in the park, right? So you're not just disturbing the area that you're building. You have to have a temporary alignment of the stream somewhere else in the park. So the footprint of disturbance became really much bigger than anyone really was initially thinking of when you say kind of daylight the stream. So folks, due to the impacts on recreational facilities and just the cost of tackling a project of this size, we decided that this wasn't a concept that should be pursued. And that you still get a great value in restoration efforts that you would be doing in Elm Grove, that you didn't have to do this to get that makes sense. So we kind of took feedback from our initial meetings and our stakeholder meetings, and we developed 2 refined concepts. And these looked at very similar programs. The big difference was at this point there's a lot of conversation on the future of a skate park in the park. So one concept looked at what the park would look like if you kind of just maintained basketball, a playground, your fields, and then you kind of gave over area to a performance stage and a lawn. So that's what you're seeing in concept 1. And then concept 2 said, well, what if we really want a skate park in the park and we want to kind of elevate what we have there and take that to the next level. So you still get a little performance lawn in there, but we kind of played around with maybe the structure of the stage becomes part of the architecture of the library. At the public meeting, I don't think any of these concepts really were the one that anyone thought this is what we should do. I think we had a lot of feedback that the skate plaza or park should be larger, which I think when you look at skate park design and when you look at these plans, the skate park is just a placeholder. It's not like we've designed anything. This is kind of just showing something in there so graphically it reads right. But the concern was with, I think we were showing about 7,000 square feet here, is it becomes too small and it becomes dangerous for people that are beginners because the people that can skate it move through the space so fast that it becomes geared towards those better skaters and the beginner skaters kind of get pushed. So that was the concern with having such a small skate park here. The other thing was we heard a lot of feedback about tennis courts. This is something that we kind of talked with the committee about, but hadn't really had a push to be showing tennis in the park. We've talked a little bit about pickleball. Pickleball, I think you're all aware of the controversies that surround pickleball. I don't know if you're showing it. The noise is a big concern. So we were kind of hesitant in terms of the number of courts to show for pickleball. What we did do in this was we showed kind of an overlay of pickleball on the basketball courts with the idea that during the morning hours they could be used for pickleball, after school hours it becomes more basketball. But I think we got a little pushback on that as well, that really basketball courts are going to be programmed for basketball pretty much all day long. We should kind of figure out how to get some paddle sports into the plan. So with feedback following the public meeting from the committee, we developed what we're referring to as the draft plan. And so what we're looking at is dedicated basketball courts, a skate plaza that is slightly larger, just under 10,000 square feet, 2 pickleball courts, and then it was in other plans, but kind of in different areas. is this multi-purpose court, which you have there today, that kind of serves a younger age group that like basketball, or things like that. We'll kind of walk through this plan in stages if you go to the next. First, we'll just kind of look at connectivity improvements that this plan is looking at. One is just major crosswalk improvements at both Windsor Ave and Narberth Ave, where they intersect with Wynwood Ave. So just kind of formalizing those crosswalks and having the desired lines be at the correct locations. Some of that does involve some curb line revisions. In both Elmwood Grove and this plan, to address the tunnel, which is something that we talked a lot about in both committee and public meetings, the tunnel isn't going to suddenly get wider. That's just the reality of the tunnel. The ability to put a new bore pedestrian tunnel through the underpass is not something that's going to happen quickly. And when I say quickly, I mean the next 20 years. So one of the things that we've looked at on both approaches to make sure we're providing a very generous walkway leading up to the tunnel, have a small staging plaza where people kind of have a chance to kind of wait, make sure the tunnel's clear, and then allow people to use the existing sidewalk. Some of the recommendations that we're going to recommend is that the township continue to explore options with the county and with PennDOT on how you could potentially signal both sides of the tunnel. Would a one-way tunnel even be feasible in terms of getting traffic through the tunnel and allowing you to widen the sidewalk so that it actually functions for pedestrians? That's something that kind of has to be studied outside of this. But that's kind of the way, that's the direction we're leaning towards, but even that in itself might not be the right solution because the traffic might just show that that's not
Where am I?
With the change in direction on Haverford Ave, though, what it does do is it eliminates the need for turning lanes on Haverford Ave and kind of puts that odd intersection. It allows you to increase parking along Haverford Ave since you now eliminate the turning lanes. We're also looking at an improved trail connection to the existing trail to the west, and then that trail would kind of continue across and become that bike lane share going up Haverford Ave. So you kind of get a very clean transition between off-road trail to on-road trail at that intersection of Haverford and Wynwood Ave. The other thing we're looking at with connectivity is kind of where we can, looking to create a very generous sidewalk all the way around the park. One of the things that today you have kind of like a 4-foot wide sidewalk. It's really difficult if you have a stroller, children with you to kind of walk and pass. So we've tried to establish kind of a 10-foot width around the parking lot. The only place where we have to narrow it down is Haverford Ave along the baseball field. It isn't possible to accommodate that full 10-foot width, so it does narrow down in that area. We're also looking at improved pedestrian crosswalks at Windsor Ave and Narbrook Park Road. And then with, again, the change of direction on Windsor Ave, it allows you to pick up some additional parking on both sides of the road. That way you're not seeing traveling that has to be accommodated through there. Kind of go next and we'll zoom in on that crosswalk. So here the idea is to kind of table the crosswalks, have a curb bump out that serves as a stormwater BMP. Since we're tabling that area, we have to kind of get the water out from those table areas. And then we're also, sorry, this is the old plan that shows the bike lane, but here we would have parking on both the north and the south side. If you go next, we have kind of a cross section of what this would look like. So this is the existing condition where you have parking on one side, 2 lanes of travel, and a pretty long crosswalk. 30 feet of road you have to cross across. And then the existing condition, the proposed condition, you can see that crosswalk narrows down to 14 feet, just the true cartway. And then you have those bump outs for stormwater then they also start to define the parking on either side. This is what it looked like as a one-way street with parking on both sides. And then that enlarged 10-foot sidewalk. Yes. And then again, just looking at a section through Haverford Ave, and what happens when you start to reverse the traffic lane and pick up parking on both sides, which some of this parking is. Again, you have a pretty wide cartway here with a narrow sidewalk, post conditions, where we start to kind of widen that sidewalk. You have the parallel parking and your shared cartway. So we'll kind of focus on the, make sure I'm saying this right, eastern side of the plan first, where all the court activity is going on. One of the things we did want to look at here is, making suggestions towards improving the parking lot. One, just to kind of clear travel direction through it, as well as try to get some tree canopy or stormwater management opportunities within the parking lot. Again, this has to be refined through the construction document once you have a survey that truly shows where your public works area is throughout here, as well as I believe you have solar charging station out there that might that would get incorporated into a final design. But it starts, the idea is we're trying to get a drop off kind of closer to the library area, as well as kind of just an intuitive one-way. We'll start at the top here at Windsor Ave. Kind of formalizing, and this is something we've tried to do throughout the whole park, is make entry points where you have a sense of arrival that you come to the park. So one of our main entry points is at the library, proposing a small plaza there with maybe a few movable tables in it, so there's a small sitting area for people. But that would be a key entrance into the park with a generous pathway that kind of leads you right down to the courts. B is kind of very similar area of your current one today. But again, kind of maybe formalizing that by having pathways that clearly take you over to the playground area, as well as down to an improved stage area. We are looking at a medium-sized stage here that would serve as a pavilion as well, but also making sure we have an ADA ramp that kind of gets people up to the back end of that stage so that it works for all performers. Looking at the playground, this is a schematic layout where we're kind of looking at the idea of keeping swings there overlooking the baseball field, but then also having two areas within the playground, one geared more towards 2 to 5-year-olds, the other 5 to 12-year-olds, but having it kind of in one cohesive area. Right now there's a lot that we heard that having the separation between the playgrounds makes it difficult to kind of manage all your children if they're in two different areas. So kind of having one key area and then having, a play surface, ported rubber play surface here that would really make an accessible environment for everybody throughout the play area. But kind of working with the existing layout of trees so that we're working to maintain the existing shade canopy around that playground. As we start to move down into the court area, at the back of the library, we do have restrooms proposed at E, and then we're maintaining the existing community gardens, but proposing another little sitting plaza back near those community gardens at F. H would be our proposed improved skate plaza area. This is, like I said, just under 10,000 square feet. And then we have I is kind of a half basketball court with 4 square and chalk art canvases kind of in that play area. And then J would be your 2 pickleball courts. And then K are the improved basketball courts. One of the things we are looking at here is maintaining the 2 sizes of basketball courts you have here, but making sure that the bleachers are kind of moved back out of the safety zone of the basketball court. Again, depending on who you use for funding moving forward, DCNR is going to want to see that 10-foot safety clear area around the basketball court. So that's how we've drawn it here. But again, it doesn't mean that you need to go out there and fix it today. And then at L, we still are maintaining a new concession stand with storage, and then M becomes that secondary entrance plaza where we have kind of a nice walkway that connects from Windsor Ave all the way down to Haverford Ave as kind of a central way to connect through the park. And we'll move over and look at the field areas. So again, we're maintaining the 2 baseball fields as currently laid out. We're improving field H, which is your 50-foot baseball field. Just kind of upgrading it, making sure there's accessible walkways to the bleachers, things like that. Recommending a true backstop on that field. You do have a wide range of people using this field. They do shift the bases, so it's not just for 50-foot baseball, which is a younger age. They do shift the bases up to 60 feet. So you do have older kids play on this field, so having a stop should be something considered on that field. And then in general, looking at the overall multi-purpose field, just some recommendations will be made in the master plan in terms of regrading of the field. And again, this is a long-term improvement. There might be some improvements you want to do, just minor in terms of more maintenance on the field, just to make sure that you have a safe playing surface. But long-term, regrading the field would help with the amount of use the field gets, just to make sure that maintenance is easier down the road. At A, we are looking at another kind of clear entrance plaza into the spectator area, where we're proposing new bleachers. At B, we were asked to kind of target about 200 seating capacity on the bleachers, which is what we have here. That does start to open up the remainder of the hill, where we're recommending kind of the removal of some of the spruce trees and kind of regrading that hill so it becomes a natural lawn sitting area, maybe planting some more understory trees there. So it becomes a more informal spectator area that works as well for 4th of July events. And then we are proposing kind of one last walkway that would connect from Windward Ave over to the War Memorial area, just to kind of start to tie that a little more into the park. And this is an area where, when there's not athletics happening, this could be more of a sitting area for people that are kind of passing through the park but don't want to be in the high activity zone of the court area and the playground. So we're kind of recommending at D there being maybe the opportunity for some themed gardens. They could be based on pollinators, nature, or meditation, similar to kind of Linwood Park and Ardmore. So that's kind of the thought at D. I think that might be everything. Sorry if I went a little longer. It's always a little more information than we think. So yeah, we have each of the plans at the end here if someone has a specific question, and then I do have some precedent pictures if anyone has a question about specific facility.
We'll start with commissioner questions. I do want to ask in particular, help us understand what our time is today.
Well, we'd like your feedback in terms of what the plans look like before we submit it to the borough. From my perspective, I haven't been that involved in much of numbers, so this has been a very interesting experience. We have a small amount of space, and we have a really diverse population of folks looking for different things from their parks. And I really do commend them. I think that Simone Collins did a really good job representing what those needs are and trying to address them in the plans. We went through a significant, I think,
So Sabine was actually initially included in the grant application that was submitted. Last year, in conversation with the individual at the state who was administering the grant, in conversations with them, we were asking basically, since the configuration of that space has not been finalized in any meaningful way from the borough's side, if it were possible to do something of like a more flexible plan. And they basically said, no, you need to have a final configuration figured out. Oh, and also, since federal funds are funding this, if it were state dollars only, we could give you more time frame to work that out. Since it's federal monies, there was more of a drop dead date on when, everything needs to be done by. So the recommendation from the state was, remove that from this planning effort, and they said you can always come back and do a future planning effort through DCNR for Sabine Park. So we accepted that advice, and actually I think this was before I was on council, but Borough Council approved to move forward without that component of it at the recommendation of the state for those reasons.
Go ahead.
Dennis Brogan, I was on the committee, I was on the park study as well. It was a lot of work for everybody. I like Rebecca, it was kind of my first, despite living here many years, involvement and getting involved, and I was impressed with how much time and effort and Simone Collins put into it and everything else. I will say that I was probably the lone dissenter ultimately with regard to some of the plans, in the sense that I thought that a tennis court then / pickleball court something. We now have the pickleball courts in there. In terms of the surveys, we have a really diverse population. We have a lot of folks that are younger than me, but it's starting to play tennis and pickleball more, and there's really no recreational activity available for folks. I'd say probably over 50, maybe 40 in the parks. So we're trying to cram so much into that park. It gets so much use. It's such a great park. But I would say that in terms of planning, because when I got on this group, I thought we were going to deal with Sabine. I don't really think it makes a lot of sense to come up with any definitive plan for Narberth Park until you get Sabine Park into the equation as well, because there are competing interests in what people want to do, and there was a good bit more tennis folks that kind of showed, if you will say that, toward the end, as opposed to the early part. And the early part, in terms of the skating park, that's really been pushed by the Lower Merion folks. There's a Lower Merion skate park group. They have the Narberth survey on their website, and they were really, they're advocates. So I think I'm not knocking them. They were really pushing to kind of expand this skate park and make it a regional skate park. And insofar as Lower Merion itself saying the town and rec parks and rec people from Lower Merion said, oh, we've looked in Lower Merion and we can't find a park, some place to put it. We have 44 parks. We are the third smallest municipality in Montgomery County, the most population intense, I would say. I'm missing the words at the moment. Density. Thank you, Michael. And Lower Merion is the largest municipality in all of Montgomery County. So anyway, they've done a great job in putting in pickleball courts now, and the skate park that they come up with is commensurate with the size of what Radnor has, and a little bit larger than what Haverford Township has. So they're doing a lot with the small space that they have. I think Elm Grove is a great setup. Businesses came out pretty strong at the end with regard to Station Square, that they really, really need this parking. So I think that, again, might be something that needs a little more time, especially with what's going on or going to go on in 230 Haverford Avenue. And then today, I learned the one open space on my street in 200 block of Dudley, you got a subdivision plan for it. What's going on? No, only kidding. It's all good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dennis. So before, again, I wanted to clarify with Rebecca or Michael, what is the trajectory of this plan or these recommendations from here on out? You're going to council when, and is there like a deadline?
December, yeah, so they'll be presented to us on council in December, and then I think the expectation is that we're going to be voting on them in January, at least that's the schedule.
Yes.
30
Because
days.
there will be a public review period from December to January for public to make comment. So I don't know that there's an actual action we're looking for from you tonight versus more this is informational for you.
Input, any kind
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
input.
Any
Feedback.
recommendations, feedback?
But we're not, we're just sort of directing our thoughts back to you, not really making a report to council. That's what it sounds like to me.
I don't think so.
I mean, I think if you have something cohesive that summarizes it in some way so that it's easier for us on, because council, what's going to happen is me and Gene have been following the process pretty closely, and Jim Spear's been in a lot of meetings. Other council members have been in and out, but they're going to get a lot of information, right? And then have to collate that in a short period of time. So to the extent that y'all have kind of feedback to provide, I think it would be helpful if it was delivered in kind of some sort of organized fashion, just so that council can review it, methodically.
If we were to make suggestions tonight, do you anticipate working on the science more and evolving from what you showed us tonight, or is this kind of what you expect from the council with various comments?
So our intent is this is what we will go to council with unless there's a fatal flaw. You guys see that we would want to address. Hopefully that's not the case tonight. But what you see tonight, based on feedback we received from you, council, and the public, we would make one last revision to create the final plan.
That would be after the 30 days.
Yeah, that would be, so that would be done in early to mid-January. I forget when I think we're targeting the later council meeting in January, is that correct?
Okay, so one last thing before we start. I watched a number of your meetings. I didn't attend in person, but I watched them. And I just, like as a planning commissioner in person, would thank you for your diligence and just kind of, it seems like stepwise, you month by month, or meeting by meeting, public meeting by public meeting, you kept at it and kept tweaking. So I hope everyone here will understand that what we saw tonight is a product of, especially the last 3 months, it feels like. You're off the station circle, we all hung out one night, and just a lot of input, revision, listening, revision, listening, revision. So thank you for doing that process. Especially for the citizen volunteers, that's not an easy process. All right, so we're going to go over now a set of comments or questions. For planning commissioners, what we tend to do is just kind of go around the table.
Yeah, sure. Well, one, I wanted to thank you. I think. Well, right. So these are more questions. In the park at Elm, I know that the area under the tunnel is really tight. Obviously, you have tunnel, but there's a way that we do with our safety, guardrail or something. Because that's really the only connectivity into the parks, right?
Right. So, well, I mean, you do have Elmwood Ave, so there's a pedestrian bridge that would connect from Elmwood Ave if you're coming from the south. But yes, coming from the north, on that side of town, that's the only direct connection. So my understanding, just looking at other survey plans that we've been able to piece together, we were provided with the traffic circle plan. If you guys were familiar with that study that was done a while ago. The traffic lanes under the bridge are, I think, 11 feet wide, like wall to curb.
Yes.
That's about as narrow as PennDOT would allow. So really, at that point, the only thing that you could probably have would be like a flexible delineator, but that's taking a 2.5 foot wide sidewalk and giving up 6 inches of that to a flexible delineator, so now you have a 2 foot wide sidewalk. So there's really, short of narrowing the lanes even more, which I don't think PennDOT would support, or going to some sort of one-way signalization of the tunnel, that's the only way you're going to widen.
So, as I said, the geometry goes on to the vertical. Yeah. So, it's not. The headroom over the sidewalk. You can't reduce the lanes, but in context, think about what this borough's been living with. We've been living with other alternatives. So down north to south. I mean, close. There is plans in the early station square that to get an ADA accessible route in two different ways, under the tracks and over the new bridge. So that's an alternative too, from north to south. The solution to traveling between the two halves of the borough doesn't just have to be that tunnel. It may not be direct between the two parts, but you are heading towards a Sussex. And so in a bigger sense, that's going to really work.
I think it's an emotional reaction of wanting the two parts connected, right?
Right.
It's tough.
I figured that would be the answer, but even if there's a guardrail for pedestrian.
But the traffic study that we're recommending needs to look at that tunnel with alternating traffic, which is going to change the queuing on the south and the north side. It has to be done for it to do anything. So it should be in the center of the borough, Windsor, Haddonfield, Narberth, Windham, and it should include parking. You can't do the traffic study unless you include parking, because you went ahead and striped because it's an immediate concern. If you change the direction, that striping will change. So scoping the traffic study.
And that actually brings me to my next question. I kind of like the idea of changing the Haddonfield and Windsor, particularly if you're going right under the bridge, because it gets back up there anyway. Don't go into it. But did there any thought on how many parking spaces potentially the net effect
Yeah.
changed? That's even outside of the scope, but
I think we have to double check our starting point for how we calculate parking, because we just did a quick visual Google Streets, how many cars we fit. But I think we're probably adding, and this is including the ones you just striped recently, probably about 10 to 15 spaces that you pick up. Especially so with Windsor, you pick up a few more, but not as many as you would think on the north side because of all the driveways between Narberth Park and Wynwood. There's a lot of driveways. You don't pick up a lot of parking there. But on Haverford Ave, because of the turning lane, is the problem. You pick up a lot.
and then last question on Narberth Park. The pickleball courts or the basketball courts, could you overlay it with the tennis courts? If you tennis overlay with pickle?
Yeah, so you can. Unfortunately, to get the economy of the pickleball courts and the multi-purpose court, we're doing two pickleball courts side by side. A lot of times you'll see tennis and pickleball courts overlaid. You can technically get 4 pickleball courts on 1 tennis court. And that does work as an overlay. But the amount of space that you need for a full tennis court there is it starts to eat. It just eats in.
Okay.
It didn't quite fit.
And my last comment. And I love the plan, but looking at it, the thought of the stage, or looking at Windsor, how it's always been, and then at Station Park, the idea is to have a similar kind of stuff, probably a similar scope. Is there any thought of turning the stage to where that baseball field is?
We looked at different stage orientations and the original kind of initial concepts, and it really, without moving a lot of the courts and being like, okay, now we're going to put basketball here, and it involved too many moving pieces to kind of reorient the stage.
Okay. I thought maybe pick up a tennis court. Stage to the baseball.
I think, so one of the things you have to realize with the baseball field is again, like before you have another facility, you should have like a 25-foot buffer outside the baseball field is kind of the guideline that it was to.
And it's important what Dennis mentioned. Important. This is a master plan. You go into final design and construction documents. You're going to be revisiting all of it. You're going to be informed about what happens in say. So that's an option to consider. Not trying to
There's just a question for the public. I just want to say that once the planning commissioners will have a chance to have questions, so we'll take questions. So don't worry. If you've raised your hand, I'll
Hey, yeah, I'd like to, again, thank you for excellent presentation and all the thoughtful work that went into it. So some of my questions will probably be rehashes of things that you heard in all those meetings that I didn't attend. But did the question or possibility of a dog park ever come up, particularly for Elm Grove?
Yes, we definitely heard the request for dog parks throughout the process. So a dog park at its smallest size, you're looking at 2 acres. Optimal size is 3 acres. So in a 2-acre dog park, you have 1.5 acres for large dogs, 0.5 acre for small dogs. I'm trying to remember the acreage of Elmwood. I think it's not even 2 acres. Right, so even there, you don't have a large enough space, because what happens when you try to do a smaller dog park is the grass becomes a cut pit. Right. You're also in a floodplain there, so that's going to be an issue as well with trying to maintain such a small dog park. Narberth Park is around 6.5 acres. I don't think anyone's prepared to give half of Narberth Park as a dog park. So that was where we kind of fell. It's you don't have the land you need to provide an adequate dog. Thank you.
So a couple of things about Station Circle. There is in the drawings the use of kind of umbrellas.
Mm-hmm.
Are they meant? Is that meant to be sort of movable furniture?
Yeah, cafes.
And I'm just wondering how that works, because how do you deal with movable?
Another one of our clients is King of Prussia Business District. And I don't know if you've been down Moore or First Avenue recently, but they have movable seating. They even have plastic Adirondack chairs up and down King of Prussia, and they're not moving. So the way that the bistro seating is, you can pick it up and you can move it, but even the chairs, they're not light. It's not like you're going to walk down the street with them. You're going to move it 5 feet, kind of try. So they're not like a restaurant chair where you can easily just pick it up. But so that's kind of the idea. There are ways that if you're really concerned about things walking the night, they could be locked up. But typically, the way they're manufactured today, that's
another example is 30th Street Station.
Yep.
Which a lot of movable furniture there. Bryant Park. It's the trend. Those things aren't walkable away. And the flexibility is great. Not having to unscrew something. So if you want to have, let's say, a concert there, do you end up moving it to the side?
Yeah.
That's the way.
Yeah, I think you would move it, because I think if you go back and look at that plan, the side aisles are pretty generous, especially between the plaza and the state store. That's still a really generous space. So the idea is, that they would just move to the sides.
Okay. And in Station Square, the previous David and Jim were central to that. We did 3 use scenarios. They're in 3 different plans that show concert seating, performance seating, and events. You can see how those elements fit in that same space. I'd love to see it in a rendering with the trees in it. If, in fact, the trees would be kind of impediments to a sight line on the stage, or kind of just, as you're indicating, maybe, a place where you could be a little bit away from the stage.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious about the scale and how the trees fit into sightlines and things like that.
I think that would work, because, obviously as they're growing, there's a little bit of flex in there. But if you think about it, the whole square kind of naturally slopes down towards Haverford. So you're always kind of looking up at the stage a little bit. So yeah, I think you would have different, like obviously the optimal viewing area would be center stage, but I think it would still be part of the action.
There was a lot of thinking both vertically and horizontally there. The idea that the plaza itself would be the same elevation across to the opposite. And then drop down. And then the other thing about the trees, one of the things that one that placement of stormwater and also shading. It's a brutal environment getting sun from the south and west, and so what we try to do is temper what would be done. So again, we're going into the final design for that at some point. Take everything that's been done before and use it to inform it.
Was there any feedback about whether or not music festivals would use that as the main stage, or would they continue to close off? I don't know.
I think
if
the
you know that or not.
idea, I think there might be some events where you do both, right? Depending on the scale of the event. But I think the idea is from an event coordinator, which we had some show up at the meeting, having a dedicated space with all the facilities that you need that's easily accessible and loaded in and loaded out does have a lot of benefits versus set up stage.
So very small things. So I noticed that the courts were different sizes. Are they different sizes now?
They are, yeah.
Really?
So one is a junior high basketball court and one is a full-size basketball court.
Okay. I didn't know. For some reason, I thought
It's
they were
hard,
the
you
same
don't
size.
notice it until you look at an aerial and you're like, oh wait, these aren't the same.
So I thought there was, in one of the earlier plans, I thought it was clever to have that sort of mini basketball court over where you have the swings. I don't know, like it's starting, the court areas are really pretty crowded. Is that still a possibility to?
I think that's something that can be, so the great thing about a master plan is you have the prior concepts, they're all part of the report. So you have all those iterations of
Right.
what you've looked at, that, because one thing that we don't have is we're not working off of a survey. We're working off of county impervious GIS data, so once you have that survey, you can really kind of fine tune locations. I think when we went to look at how pickleball fit in, we were kind of left with this piece that was the exact size of the multi-purpose court. So it's kind of made sense to let it be in there, because otherwise that space just kind of becomes a void space that what goes there. So there was some economy in kind of putting all the courts together, even though it does kind of seem overwhelming. But it's not much different than what you have today in terms of basketball courts and tennis courts. Like, it's all still in that footprint.
Right.
It's just organized differently.
And maybe a minor point here, but can I assume that Chet Tyson as a name is going to continue to be used for the pavilion? Is that going to carry over or not?
Yeah, and if you have any history you can share on the name of the pavilion, because I did ask that really early on, and I don't think we got an answer, so.
He was a council member of long-standing and a booster of athletics in Northworth for centuries. So when it came time to honor him, that old pavilion that's there now was the way to do it. Starting.
Yeah, we can definitely incorporate that should be, or, pursued moving forward.
Yeah, people like their history around here, so.
If you have any history on the statue at the corner,
Yeah.
if you want to share that with us, because we are recommending relocating it onto that little plaza there, but because it's kind of in a forgotten space.
Well, this is obviously a master plan intended to be effectuated over many years. So is there a concept in mind of how that would
Yeah.
go and what the order of march would be?
Yeah, so that's kind of what our task is for the next month, is to really put costs to everything now that we have a plan that I think we're all in agreement with at the committee level. We can start to put costs at it and kind of come up with a phasing strategy. Internally, we've talked early on that the playground kind of makes the most sense in terms of tackling that first, and that it's something that we've always had it in the same location on every concept for the most part. And it is something that is a very concise component to construct and improve. And that gives you a little time to kind of figure out what direction you want to go with the course too. Because I think in general, we're looking at probably a strategy that's going to give you a 10-year plan, but in reality, that might become a 20-year implementation because every round you're going for funding and then finalizing design. So, sometimes so 10 to 15 years, I think, would be a reasonable. So we'll probably have about 4 to 5 phases that we target over 15 years.
Just to add to that, the cost estimates are going to be itemized by element so that you can recombine those. First year is probably going to be the easiest where everybody can understand, this money is available this year, we want it to go for this. But as, you're going to be revisiting things, like coming to council, go, no, we need to estimate sooner than later. Then you have the cost. Make your applications to ECR or ECD, the agencies, according to when you finish one project. You start another.
Or we might have a generous donor that says we want to fund this aspect. And that becomes a priority.
Then it all becomes a trickle. I wonder if when, hopefully, within my life, the remains of my lifetime, decisions are made about, say, facilities that are decided to be accommodated will have a ripple effect backwards to the work that we are doing now. I wonder if that's not the case. For example, when I look at the plan, ingeniously, you have combined a whole lot of functions in a very limited space, preserving the full-size baseball field, for example, kind of at the expense of a generous treatment of some of the other functions, which are, as I say, ingeniously packed in like sardines. Were there to be a save line, which is another couple of acres of open space, undesignated space, to take the pressure off this playground, and would really change the game, in my opinion. We would be looking at a whole different game. And hope that there is flexibility in the adoption of the master plan for Narberth Park to allow there to be a little bit of.
Well, I think there's been enough public involvement in this and enough kind of iterations that we're giving you. I mean, often we're working with one client right now in Whitpain where we did a full master plan where they thought that they were going to build a whole summer camp facility with indoor conditioned space and everything. Well, it turns out the building that they thought they were going to repurpose you can't repurpose it. It's gone. Right? So now it's just going to be a summer camp park program like any of their other parks. So we're quickly just doing a very simple redefining of what the master plan is, right? And so maybe that's when you look at the State-Pine master plan, maybe there's a small component that says, do we revisit within the scope of what we've already decided for Narberth? It's not we're going to come up with a new master plan, but we've looked at multiple concepts for Narberth. Is there one that now has a little more precedence out of the refined plans that we've started with the State-Pine?
Yeah.
So I think there is that opportunity to do that in a meaningful way without saying, this master plan doesn't have any credit.
Well, I think it's important to convey to the council that the master plan is not something that ends on a certain date. Master planning is going to continue with eyes wide open for years to come until we decide what happens up there at the top of the hill, and acknowledging that developments up there may have a big effect on what we do down here.
Jim, Dennis is saying the same thing, as far as I'm hearing. It happens to the same line is going to form Barbara, especially here. So it's easier to we hammered out a plan that's packed. We call it it's packed. It's easier to take an element out than it is to try to revisit it and add something else. So the plan now shows maximum.
Yeah.
And so if you want to leave that in the years to come, that's easy.
And I should say, it's not even kind of redoing a little master plan, it's kind of that schematic phase of a construction documentation plan, where you just have a little bit of that fee that works out a new schematic as we move forward with that construction plan. So it's not like you have to go through.
But you have to think holistically though, and you have to think broad brush. You build things out of concrete and I wish they were made of taffy later. And, we have a tunnel that served its purpose in 1880 or whenever it was built. Any horse and buggy could get through that, but boy, oh boy, I wish they had built it bigger. And every mom on the south side of Narberth who tries to push a stroller through there at her peril, which is that there was, some flexibility there.
Can I make a comment? That's appropriate.
Mike, let's let the planning commissioner go first. Do you have any comments about station?
Do you anticipate any further development before this master plan is finalized for the Station Circle area?
I think what we've laid out as a draft plan, I think gives you a good direction moving forward in terms of how you reincorporate parking back into it. I know you were at a public meeting where parking came up. So if there's any comments you have in that regard, we would appreciate feedback. We spend a lot of time thinking about Station Square.
That plan does.
Yeah, it does.
And I think that when you invite the bullet and do the traffic study and look at the parking, it needs to be looked at in its entirety. Because during COVID, you took away parking spaces and dedicated to streeters, right? Is it the same equation now? The people who are saying we need more parking are using the streeters. So you have to look at all the parking.
No one complained about the streeters. No one complained. I lost my parking space to the streeters. Now I'm gonna go have a beer and drown my sorrows.
That's my point. But to do a real study, you need to
Right.
flex it.
So one thing the planning commission can do is to underscore the need for the traffic analysis to be performed and not treat it like, it would be as a codicil, it would be something that would be nice to do, maybe we'll do that later. It shouldn't be that way. We should demand that the council authorize a traffic study now to validate a lot of the things that are built in to this master plan.
Yeah, and the master plan starts to really crystallize your destinations, right? And the linkages between both vehicular, bike, and pedestrian, right? That hadn't been done before, so.
We've talked about it, Bill, we've talked about it for years.
But now it's done, and so when you're doing that loop, let's say, you're really a lot more informed.
So I propose to my fellow planning commissioner.
Person who's speaking from the audience, we don't know who this person is. Could someone please introduce that gentleman who's been speaking the entire meeting? Thank you.
JJ, we'll call on you at the end. Please don't break into the conversation. If you break into the conversation, I'm not going to call on you at the end.
I
Okay?
just want to know who it is. Just introduce that person, please.
Who's who?
Bill Collins with Simone Collins is one of the principals on the project.
I'm gonna skip, go next, Jennifer.
So Michael and I have met several times to review because I could not be at some of the meetings, but we have had extensive conversations. I am excited by the draft plans. I think it incorporated a lot of the conversations that he and I had separately. As far as just the taking a hard look at like ways that the basketball courts can remain as is while incorporating significant changes to other aspects of the park. I am very interested in the review of the traffic study. I do question if there's a way for it to also include an economic impact study on the initial impact of changing the flow of traffic. I think long-term, people's habits change, but there is the potential for an initial economic impact in changing how people outside of Narberth interact with Narberth when they're driving from Lancaster to Montgomery. Because that is a fairly significant flow of just outside borough members utilizing that flow. But as someone who lives here, I think it would be a really interesting review and really alter the approach through town. As far as, I have just a small comment on pickleball, they do now make quiet balls. I saw them at a conference the other day. And so you can now encourage or provide, Narberth could have the quiet balls for community concern, which is exciting.
Have some check out at the library.
Yeah.
Your quiet paddles in front of quiet
Whose
balls.
stuff should we buy?
Yeah, that's the real question. I think on the Narberth Park side, my only question is, there is that section of land that does run out onto Conway, that at the moment is really only utilized occasionally by the fire department for some bonfire fire safety, and then mostly just by the families that live on Conway to utilize for kids playing, etc. I did not know if that portion was taken into account to kind of.
We considered it, so we do have Public Works is always gonna be a reality. We were tasked with, maintaining that area. So that kind of cuts off that area and then it's on the other side of the park. So it's really hard to kind of bring that area into the park. If anything, and this needs to be done very carefully and creatively, but there might need, if you are to improve the parking lot, you might need to cut into that area a little bit more for Public Works in the future.
I think that, at the last meeting, it was asked of Jeff, the head of Public Works, there was something about that space that limits any further use, but whether there's some other electrical equipment, some kind of connection at that space, he indicated made it difficult to try to expand the park into that space.
Well, it's a lot of work. Thank you for sharing it, and a lot of thoughtfulness on an assessment of the needs of the borough and the opportunities. I guess for me, a couple of items. Right, one is you said developing a cost sheet so that maybe would assist with prioritization about sort of return on investment or cost benefit of different components, and maybe there's a way to value engineer some of the ideas so you could get the benefit with less cost to make it more feasible. I think that the execution of any of the plans and designs is probably the quality ultimately depends on the details of the design. I mean, a good idea could fizzle if it's not quite right. And then in some ways, like organically emerging solutions, reflect maybe what the user's, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So I guess I'm a little worried about baking in solutions in concrete, right? And so I support movable chairs because it's sunny over here and you're cold, you can move the chair. It's cold, you move it to the shade, right? So if we hardwire things, we don't have that flexibility. For the playground, my kids are now in high school, but I remember there was some research about a decade ago really talking about the need for children to have free play and to take physical risks. And that's actually where motor skill development comes from, and also potentially cognitive benefits. And so again, if we're looking at what's going to make a successful playground, hopefully it's not, again, sort of an adult's version of how childhood should be, but rather, places for kids to actually, explore on their own, so to speak. So I don't know exactly how that solution works and how it works in risk management, but I can tell you what it doesn't look like. So
Yeah. And if I can just speak to that really quickly, I think with the playground, again, we've kind of identified a placeholder and we'll attach a budget to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's ways, you can look at, there's some really creative manufactured play out there that maybe doesn't quite hit the mark for you, but does start to address what you're talking about. There's also a lot of manufacturers that are catering specifically to what you're talking about, which I think with the space that we've laid out in the budget, that's something that could be explored as you develop the playground a little bit more in terms of what does it really look like? Is everything manufactured? Is there more open play opportunities, creative play opportunity, things like that? Because I think imaginative play is something that is overlooked a lot in playgrounds because it's so focused on physical activity. So there are, I think, what we've laid out as a placeholder, but the design of that playground should warrant a little more process when you get to construction documentation.
Great. So for the big, I guess, motor vehicles always dominate the discussion about what's the best habitat for the motor vehicles. But so, I do think, obviously we have to proceed with caution with changing the direction of streets that may impact people's longstanding travel patterns. But with that said, suppose we ran with the idea that reversing Haverford is a good idea for, sort of that it might better support the downtown. I don't know that it always follows that it has to be a couplet completely. Maybe you could just leave the other street alone, right? It could remain a two-way street, and it may actually work better if you have more options for which way to go. Especially I think for the parking, you could count the number of parking spaces before the plan and after. Yeah. And if it's not changing significantly, right, then there shouldn't be that much to worry about. Because I thought past the baseball park, it's is it really so important that we have 3 or 4 parking spaces, or could we just widen the sidewalk next to the dugout? I don't know, but it seems like kind of, maybe the walkway is more important there next to the dugout. And then for the tunnel, I realize we're down one bridge. We really need, that would help, right? To have an alternate route, hopefully. But, I think, how do I put this? I don't know how well a directional tunnel will work, but I can tell you that probably 80% of engineers would be very good at charging you a fee to rule it out. Sure. And, we'd have to find the 20% of engineers that might be able to prove that it works. And I think it's really intriguing to think about a system of traffic lights that control the flow there. You have to manage it from the 2 intersections, if you will. But because I don't think it's fair that people in wheelchairs can't get across town, right now. Or to say that, we got to have 22-foot cartway, and therefore we have a 2.5-foot sidewalk. That's not acceptable. Even to a game of inches on that sidewalk. But the reality, like you said, is that the stone wall is you're up against there, and your trucks and things have to shy away from the wall for clearance reasons, maybe. So it's, to maintain two-way traffic, there's just not enough space. And I think that it's I think for all of us, it's we could try the traffic light scheme, and you can always undo it if it doesn't work. Well, maybe you can't, but or we can come up with $10 million for some new Austrian tunnel method to take under the embankment, and maybe that could work too, but it's a lot more expensive. So I thought, I don't know, like, I think we should, I'm interested to see where we go with some of the big ideas, but I also think that maybe the inexpensive, smaller, more tactical moves, like we could do those sooner, and try to do them cheaper. Like maybe the train station, the existing canopy is so utilitarian and yet so functional compared to so many other train stations. And so, just moving our chess pieces judiciously. All right. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
So back to Northern Park. You must have said this. I'm not sure if I saw it. The master plan presenting has sort of been booked.
It does, yes. It maintains all the current sports. So just so you understand, the current football field does overlay the 90-foot infield.
Sure.
And it does interact with the smaller baseball diamond as well.
Sure. It's just the way that the curved walkway around.
We'll confirm that, but I think it still fits in there.
But we didn't see a diagram. So that's
Yeah, but you did not.
So that's it. I'm kind of curious. The baseball fields L.
Yeah, sorry, we had a few revisions over the weekend.
Does it necessarily have to go there? I mean, couldn't it go someplace else?
This is the smaller baseball field.
Yeah.
So that is where it currently exists. So we're just improving the existing baseball field. So there are orientations that you have to meet with baseball fields, and
60-foot field?
Yes, because you have batters and pitchers. So for DCNR, they prefer that the batter not be looking into the sun. So typically you're going to be playing in the afternoon. So for that reason, most fields need to be, the preferred orientation is north-northeast. But you're allowed to have some sway in that orientation from east to south. You just can't go into the west direction. So that allows us to maybe consider one other corner, and I always get back up here. I forget which corner was the alternate corner. Is it
The one that didn't work was the lower right this time.
Yeah. So it would have to go in the upper left, which I don't know that becomes, I think that makes the fields overlap even more, which is not, because they do actually use both fields at the same time.
How often?
I think it's when they have really young kids playing on the smaller field, and then not adults on the larger field, if that makes sense. So I think it's probably once or twice a week, something like that.
Not this.
Not
The only reason I ask is because that's a real pinch point. And if there was a way to be, considered where L is, you may have to road for all that stop that's jammed together. You never ever going to optimize anything, so some uses might not be optimized. I think that's just what. So that's just what I think. I read Charles Open Space 4 years ago. One thing I learned was don't fire chief will get you sooner or later. So
we did float the idea by the fire chief, and he was not against it.
Well, that's progress. The fire chief shot down the idea we had for the rainforest on the surroundings. On either side, particularly the side where the driveways we assessed wasn't worth doing much because the parking is so minimal. The good thing was that was capping the water that the driveway was they're actually standing on the drive. So if you've got different feedback, let's just sit.
And I should say that was specifically on the one-way pairs. I'm not sure if he weighed in on the rain garden.
Well, it's more about the narrowing.
Yeah.
Turning radius and narrowing currently because they like that to be there. We get out, but and I'm just saying I experienced that because we had things to get. I wanted to ask about removing the spruce trees over.
Yeah.
So, just in general, I mean, one of the bits of public feedback you got was they really like to have nature. So, and I know earlier plans had walkways that were kind of in the area where there's street trees on Aberthurns, or just what overall would the kind of net gain loss of trees be?
It's really, so we don't have a survey. In general, this plan strives to pretty much preserve everything in the playground and library area. We are, with the widening of the Windsor Ave sidewalk, the existing street trees that are planted under the power lines and have been trimmed significantly, those would get replaced with new appropriate street trees for planting under power lines. So that's what we're seeing here along Windsor. So that would be a significant change within the tree makeup. In the area of the bleachers, I mean, a lot of those, I think there's spruces and white pines. They're starting to break just from storm damage, things like that. So that's why we kind of felt like it made sense to replace that with shade trees or understory trees that would be more appropriate for a sitting area.
Another question I have is how, I don't know if you thought this level of detail, but how is how are the features you're imagining in the playground area different from the features that exist?
One is just modernization of play, in terms of just, the lifespan of most play equipment is about 20 years. I think you do have some newer equipment in there, but a lot of it is aged out in terms of its lifespan. So you're looking at modern safety standards for fall heights and things of that regard. And then the other big component is just accessibility. Trying to include, and you do have accessible swings today in your playground, so you have taken measures to do that. But you might not have, like the idea is maybe there's an accessible spinner where if someone's on a wheelchair, they can roll right up onto the spinner. So that's kind of what the one play equipment is there. But then also kind of one of the things that will be in the narrative is just talking about inclusive play opportunities. So, there's accessibility, making sure that everyone can get on the playground, but then inclusive play looks more at what is the play experience for everyone that's in the playground, and then also what's the experience for the caregivers. So really kind of looking at some of those trends that are more current today in terms of how everybody interacts in the play space and feels like they can get to the coolest thing on the playground and be involved in that thing, and that everyone's equal.
That relates to another question I had. And I feel like, this is a topic that really gets resolved in some of those. But one of the things I noted in the public comments was the comment about currently some of the people whose comments were said they felt that things were more tuned to boys than to girls. And I don't really know enough to know what is attuned to a boy or girl, but I shake it in faith that it's true. So I'm kind of curious what would that look like to revamp the playground so that there were other features so that it isn't as
Yeah, and I don't know if that was, and maybe it was specifically to the playground, but I think that comment started to come up a lot when we talked about baseball, because it was like baseball field, and people were like, well, the girls have a softball program. So at one point in some of the concepts you'll see, we propose a hybrid softball field that would basically be designed for softball to be used for baseball. And we actually got pushback that that's not what's needed, because there is no softball program shifted to Lower Merion during COVID, and they don't anticipate coming back into Margaret, was my understanding. Am I wrong? I see that shaking.
Well, that's just nonsense. Because over the years, you have the flow of public opinion and the growing Title IX, the growing prevalence of sports for the girls. It's going to change that.
But so that field H could easily be developed to serve softball and baseball, just baseball. That decision is it's literally just whether or not you skin the infield is the only difference. And you have a rollout mound instead of a permanent mound. And that's how it accommodates both sports. So that's something that can easily be addressed. But I think in terms of when you look at the fastball courts, you look at the skate plaza, you look at pickleball, you look at the playground, those appeal to anybody. They're not gender based.
I don't know. I was thinking about whether like certain play just gender or not.
I think it's probably moved away from that, but I could be surprised. Maybe there is.
My two granddaughters are having a great time down there at Candy Cane City. That's all I can say.
Well, I will say this with respect, but the organized sports leagues have a lot of power. But they only represent things that are organized now. They don't represent things that aren't organized now, or will be organized now, or aren't organized now, because they have no space to be organized. The pocketful planning process, powerful representatives. And so I think it's always important to keep in mind that there may be things that would happen if you only.
Well, I'll say there's a developing rugby club that I believe is either just women or co-ed that has been using this space. So, there is a diversity in how the fields get used. I think it's just when early on people just kept hearing baseball because that's all we were being told. But like I said, every meeting we learned about a different sport that's using these fields. So I think there is a lot of diversity in how the fields are used and who has access to it.
Also, it may not be a lot of comfort, but the geometry, the amount of the area preserved.
Yeah, that's right. No, you're right.
So you can't create that area. That's preserved.
I had one question about Elmgrove Park. There is, at least in the draft, drawing I'm looking at, it's like there's a 6 foot wide ADA walkway. There's also there's another walkway that leads along the meadow and the wetland. So when I see meadows, it's often typical to see a path that's just mowed. I guess that mowed path would not be, right, because the surface isn't
Right.
accepted.
Yeah. So again, since we're not working off a survey, we're showing like a long windy path that would be accessible to get people kind of down to that core use area of G. So we do need to make sure that like we're providing accessible routes to key recreational facilities that we're proposing here.
Right.
But, once you have a survey, you might see that it's not feasible to really have this walkway that goes from B to G. Maybe where E is, maybe that connects into the sidewalk, right? And maybe that just becomes a mown path that goes up. So I think there's things like that we're just showing the concept of a path so that we can cost linear feet. If anything, we're overshooting final design budgets. But once you have a survey and you really start to, because the other big unknown here is just what that stream bank restoration really starts to look at. Once that gets engineered, that's going to start to change the geometry of this plan.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you came up with other options because it is nice to make sure proper access to
And here it's a little tricky because there are, a floodplain, so you can't use permeable pavements. You don't want to use stone dust that's going to move during a flood. So really, for better or worse, asphalt's probably the best ADA walkway we can propose here, and the most environmental walkway we could propose here in terms of putting sediments into your streams.
Yeah.
So even though it's not always people's favorite surface, sometimes it's the best environmental surface.
Then in terms of Station Square, folks here at the committee know that I do believe the whole site has a ceiling. Are you proposing that? Or are you proposing
The idea is to have a flush, even grade, so no steps within the plaza. So yes, a slope has to be maintained because we still have to meet the geometry of existing door entrances. We have to meet the geometry of roads outside of where we're crossing over. But the idea is for the plaza to be free of any changes of grade. So yes, there would be kind of a natural slope.
And then just note, and I'm sure it's not, it's not what you're doing, that if traffic flows in, if plaza is that because it flows out closer to the traffic.
Yes.
And we did look at that a lot when we went to 230 Haverford Avenue, and included that cars can make that passing. It's improved. It's a much more challenging situation for these pedestrians than cars coming up here. So I think that is, that's what I think. I'm not sure if you're getting at this, Adam, but it may be minimal gain, parking-wise, for a lot of additional conflict of cars and pedestrians. So that it all has to be considered.
I think the one thing that you lose here that you can't really pick up in a meaningful way would be a pedestrian drop-off of the traffic station, because that would have to be on the north side of Haverford. But I think your point of looking at the geometry of exiting on the other end is very well.
And when you do the traffic study, you could have an eastbound out, keep the exit and entrance to the same. Look at that.
Yeah.
So there's a couple different elements in the scope.
Well, you could, if you reverse and where N is on this drawing, if you left all of the traffic circulation in town the same, which also doesn't cost anything, so traffic would be flowing the opposite direction, and you could have back-end angled parking as an alternative as well. But I guess, I mean, you're trying to save space, but you could have your lay-by on the right-hand side of that driveway.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. And none of the transportation was part of this. We did it because we needed to do a certain level to inform the recreation. And we knew early that study, we were going to recommend a study that made strong.
The other, just as a technical matter, the loading docks for that development are back there, and the trash truck goes in that way. So
we looked at fire truck turnaround, we took all those things into account. So the internal circulation on 230, you can't.
I think there was an International Peace Treaty set.
I was out in the country at the time. I didn't hear about it.
It was took a lot of people to work out. So I'd like to turn it over to public comment for questions. We'll first start in the room, and so Dave, sorry, wait.
Okay, that's all right. So much to talk about, but I'll limit it. First of all, I'll second or third the comments about needing the traffic study. I was not able to be at the last public meeting, which I regret now because obviously an awful lot was talked about. When I see these plans, I'm kind of distressed to see the amount of parking that's all of a sudden is now on these drawings that kind of negate, it seems to me, an awful lot of what we talked about in the original charrettes and the original concepts. Before we conclude that we have to have these parking spaces, I'd sure like somebody to establish that we really need these parking spaces, because I think it really, really dilutes the concept that started the whole thing about the station circle, or the station's square.
Here.
So I really think, I don't care what direction Haverford Avenue runs, but I would sure like to get rid of some of these parking spaces. The whole talk about prioritizing a master plan, just as an aside, I was walking through there the other day when I heard a crunch, and I witnessed yet another guy backing his bumper into one of those light standards. We have a really dreadful design. I would really suggest that we need to do something about the station squares sooner rather than later. This guy next to me has told me an awful lot about the arcane world of funding, so I understand that it's not something you flip a switch and have it done, but we have a really, really horrible design, and hopefully we don't need to wait 20 years to have it done. But enough about Station Square. About Sabon Park, I've mentioned this before and it's been pretty roundly ignored, but I'll mention it again because it's on the table. The word holistic has come up today. We really need to think holistically when we talk about Sabine Park, and that includes the buildings and the built environment up there as well as the open space. We're sitting in a building, and I apologize that I mentioned this before, this building is woefully obsolete despite the money that's been put into it recently by the borough. The concept is obsolete. When we look at stations, when we look at Sabine Park, we really have to look at the existing buildings and the strip of space along Montgomery Avenue that's not usable for parkland and see how we think about the next generation of borough buildings and how this building may be adaptively reused in that iteration and how functions could be accommodated on that site without sacrificing parkland. I think it's incredibly short-sighted to think of it only as a park study. It's a borough asset study. It really needs to be looked at it that way. We have a once in a century chance to get this right. And I suggest that we need to look at it expansively and look at the total needs, both open space and physical plant needs of the borough when we look at it. It also include this building and how that might inform our decisions.
Thank you for the plug. And just to add what David's saying, I couldn't agree more. There's two agencies that are generally used by communities to fund recreation studies. One of them is strictly recreation and trails, that's DCNR. The other one, DCD, Community Economic Development, recognizes recreation, but also community development. DCNR doesn't want to, that's why it was taken out of the project originally, because they don't want to look at the buildings, and we've seen them do that. But DCD will. So that's what, if you want to approach it that way, look at those two sources matching.
Dave, we appreciate you being Good to see you here.
Appreciate being asked to be here.
David, do you have any comments to make?
Yeah, I mean, overall, looks nice. I guess a couple of thoughts. One, think about the playground, the equipment there, the kids. Want to request the Industrial Development Authority. They have some money. Bathrooms. Link to the show, I've heard a lot of comments on it, but if Lower Merion is willing to give a fair amount of money for a nice facility, that
talk about it. I think Simone Collins indicated that it's so packed out. That a skate park and a regional attraction, there's not enough space for that to happen. Or Marion can't find a place to put a skate park in that massive township. Was very insistent that they would fund it, but it's got to be at least what they want. And so that is it.
What do they want to?
Well, they want 18,000 square feet, but their original, and this was at a meeting where their Parks and Rec folks, the president of whatever the title is, was present, and then the skate park folks spoke, and they made it clear that they wanted so that it would be a place where a good skater wouldn't be embarrassed to go. Now, again, Radnor Township, much bigger, has one that's about 10,000 square feet, not quite. Haverford Township has one that's about 7,000 or 8,000 square feet. They want one that's concrete, they want big bowls, they want verts, things that I don't totally understand, but I know they're all kind of the high end of the skate park thing. If we had a place for it, I think the skate park idea is fine, but we have the regional basketball facility for the area. We have the regional baseball facility for the area. Lower Merion, when our folks couldn't they have too many teams right now. You know, baseball goes up and down, but right now they have too many teams. They had to use a Lower Merion field, but because they didn't have at least 50% of the kids on the team being from Lower Merion, or some of them from Delaware County, whatever, they had to pay to use the Lower Merion field. So, so then when we had this last meeting in the skate park, one of the drawings was about 7,000 square feet, and the discussion was that a regional skate park, an attractive skate park is, that the whole region wouldn't make sense for that small facility. Within 2 days, Lower Merion got back to the borough and said, if you don't make it at least 14,000 square feet, we're not going to be interested in funding. So they're telling us, this little borough, the smallest, next to the smallest facility, the municipality in all of Narberth, in all of Montgomery County, and that we're supposed to do their bidding. Now, maybe it's just my visceral reaction, but I don't really like that idea too much. There is no park in this area that is used less than Narberth Park. You can go to General Wayne, you can go to South Ardmore. Polo Fields is Haverford Township, but it's on the Lower Merion website that they use that facility. You look around, there's so much space that they could do it, but there's a reason they don't want a regional park. I don't know what it is. They're not saying, but I know there were signs up in Belmont Hills that said, no skate park here. And maybe they talked to the people near General Wayne, no skate park here. I don't know why they don't want a skate park. But, the one in Radnor I know has been closed down now, and they're doing repairs, and there's a lot of graffiti and all that. So all I know is that from what we heard from the Simone Collins, what I think makes the most sense is a regional skate park means we're going to have traffic, we're going to have people come in. And what does it add to the borough? I don't think the basketball courts, other than the history and the joy of watching people play, I don't think it brings money into Narberth. I don't know how a skate park is going to bring money. So I don't see that as making sense for this small space.
Right, let's move on. It appears that the committee's consensus to 10,000 square feet.
I'm sorry?
It appears that the committee's consensus too, because you have a 10,000 square feet skate, which I assume you all feel is good size.
We had a robust discussion.
Yes.
I think
We're reliving it.
Okay. Gigi, we'll turn to the internet. Is there any?
I apologize.
No, I wasn't.
No, I won't.
David, did you say you had something else?
No, I didn't get a chance. I'll be more than happy to set a conversation.
Okay.
I think that if you're initially having a conversation,
Okay, let's move on from skate park. Because I feel like you've given us a solid doing over. So, Gigi, thank you for meeting.
Yeah.
Just speak up.
Just barely.
Hold on one second. Sorry.
Try again, Gigi.
I'm trying. Push all the buttons.
That's better. Keep it up.
I'm pushing all the buttons. So first and foremost, and I'm sorry, the audio and the visual dropped out. The Zoom dropped out at one point. There's a person, a woman, I believe, next to the left of Mr. Guardini, who made a statement. I don't know who that is, and I didn't hear those comments regarding the presentation because it did drop out.
I'm Rebecca Moore. I was on the Master Parks Planning Committee. I was the chair of it. The only comment I made was the diversity of community that we have, the small amount of space that we have, and that there was a great emphasis throughout the process in soliciting feedback from the community to get an idea, not only from those who use it now, the parks now, but from those who don't. What would they like to see in a park? That was all.
Thank you for repeating it. Sorry about that.
So Gigi, there are 3 people here tonight from the Park Study Committee who've been speaking, and 2 people from Simone Collins, the consultants, who've been speaking. So the 5 people who've been speaking have been from the Parks Committee and from the consultants.
Thank you. And my next question is, Mr. Guardini referenced that the DCNR would be part of the funding, possibly, of parts of this or most of this, and then spoke about federal dollars. Can someone tell me what federal department this money would be coming from?
The grant was funded by the, I believe it was the stimulus package, but the funds were administered through DCNR.
So are you under I'm kind of.
Through the planning process, there's no funding identified for any well, first of all, before we even get to any implementation, there'll have to be all sorts of design and things like that. The only thing that we have funding for at this point in time is the process that we're all discussing right now. And that was funded through partnership with the state and federal government.
Okay, so, and maybe Simone Collins could answer this, I don't know. Is there an expectation that the state and Fed has more money to invest in these kinds of projects?
So typically, when DCNR funds a master plan, they want to be a partner through implementation. They're not in the business of funding plans that never get built. So yes, DCNR would be a natural funding partner as we move forward and apply for grants. As Bill Collins spoke earlier, DCD can often be matched to DCNR, so that's the Department of Economic and Commercial Development, Community Development, thank you. So those can often be matched, and then there might be opportunities. Again, a lot of the federal funding that would be available for parks would be administered through DCNR, so the Land and Water Fund is administered for DCNR, so that can bring a larger funding amount in. So again, with that, there's more paperwork that has to be done, but it's still administered through DCNR.
And this is my last question, and thank you for answering. I appreciate that. I really do. Mr. Rogan talked a little bit about skate parks and sizes, and heard that for a bunch of years, and we get talking about rather. But then he mentioned that a regional skate park would bring traffic, but not necessarily dollars. Is it the goal of this plan, or planning commission, or council then to somehow have these parks generate income or generate funds somehow, some way?
I think, that kind of came up at the last public meeting. I think there's no intention that there would be any user fees You currently don't have user fees. There might be a modest rental fee for a pavilion, but I don't think you even charge that. I don't think there's been any talk about changing that. I think what the thought was is that when you bring people into an area to partake in activities, that they might stay and linger and add to your commercial district. I think that's more what people were speaking to. I don't know if that answers your question.
I just wanted to make sure we weren't going to look at the Atlantic Richfield, baseball. We weren't going to have to go through any of that, but thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so, sorry, go ahead.
This is just a quick question. From the transportation perspective, particularly for Harrisburg, work with you guys, sort of like wider sidewalks, being encouraged to get kind of by minimize the lane of the sidewalk. From the Greenway.
Yeah, we had explored early on whether or not the multi-use path should continue in the park, because you can't really, the field is, so the 90.
More as a replacement for like a sidewalk, just like,
Yeah.
so it'd be where the sidewalk is.
You have to make a change somewhere where the greenway comes in from the west. And that's our understanding. It's coming in that application. So when you change the facility, you get it into the park, and then have them down the block, put people out on the street, or you change it right at the intersection. And so it's clearly identified and going to a share of that.
Then the other item, particularly with the bridge, related to hurricane, pursuing something grand, just so it's in there, so we have the opportunity to have something in plan.
You mean the pedestrian bridge across the street? Yeah, and I think the idea is that we want to make it wide enough so it's accessible, but it's never meant to be vehicular, so it doesn't need to be overly wide. But yes, we want to make sure that that's a clear connection into the south side.
There's a couple of people who have mentioned, I believe, new tunnel in just for the record during Station Square and after the borough went for security. To study it. It was on the Essex Street. Wasn't trying to widen wouldn't replace a sidewalk that's needed through the windows. But it would, according to the grades available, created ADA accessibility route right at the station, right in the center.
The air conditioner one?
Yeah.
No, we can't hear you. No.
Yeah, and the building there. I just wanted to get that back on the record, that the borough did look and did pursue the idea of having another route.
Then, like for the last item, they coordinated with the county, particularly with Bonko 2050, because Bonko 2040 is a great grant funding for implementation. And most likely that program will.
Yeah, we'll make sure that you guys get a copy to review once we issue the draft plan, just so that you can provide any additional.
Okay, so let's talk and see if we can focus on any kinds of comments or recommendations we'd like to offer to study group. Here's that one idea that has come up repeatedly is that the suggestion that we recommend that council should authorize the traffic. Now, to be clear, folks have talked about that. Is that a traffic study? We've talked about the tunnel. We've talked about the couplet. We've talked about moving around downtown. Is it all the above? Something about what is it at the general level, the scope of a traffic study that you all are thinking like to suggest?
I think if we're gonna assess changing the direction of Haverford, that it needs to be a comprehensive study that includes if there's a change to the light arrangement at the tunnel at Wynwood, if Windsor should be left as is or become inverse one way to whatever Haverford is. I think you can't really comprehensively study one. I do think at the tunnel there is an easy way to just put a dual light on the other side of the tunnel. And it would just be on the same timer as the one on Wynwood, which would immediately make it a moving cost. Could be studied. I think there's a concern that the fee for that particular study could become expensive, but I think that if you try to piecemeal it and do them all individually, you'll actually end up spending more than if you did this one large comprehensive study.
Other thoughts about this question?
Like she said.
Like she said, this is taking into account the circulation of vehicles in and out of Station Circle and around and around.
It was coupled with an understanding of how traffic impacts the businesses in the downtown. That would be great too. I know you can make a study just mushroom and become a big deal, but that would be something that people would be very.
Does this also need, I think, Dave, you might have brought it up, does it also need to really look at, I think we did, the borough's parking study, did that really look a lot at the commercial parking? Does anyone know?
My memory is the discussion was about the residential.
So, big commercial, I mean, so it probably should include parking. That's all. Yeah.
Well, I mean, okay. And
What are you thinking,
what will we do with this study?
Well, having a little more information might help us understand the efficiency of what kind of parking, where parking, how much parking in downtown is really an issue. Is it worth making changes to street direction just to get 6 more parking spots on Windsor Avenue? Or not, I don't know.
Can we get a strong enough result considering?
That's fair. Probably not.
That would be my concern. Because, and the other thing is that I think that some of the vocalization on the parking on Station Square was coming from the commercial tenants themselves and not necessarily from the users. And oftentimes, commercial leases are written with a number of tenants.
I think we should proceed with caution, to be honest. I mean, it's just, it's unknown what the impact of that. Yeah, I mean, to change the condition, I'm not an advocate for the automobile, but I think we should be advocates for the businesses. And so we need to, just make sure that we do no harm. And it is also a train station. It's really important that it function as a train station. And one of the big challenges right now is that you can't drive to the other side without the bridge. So you can't drop people off at the inbound side in a car, right? From this side of town without going down through the tunnel and back to the neighborhood and stuff. So having a way, I don't know if you guys know this, but in the morning, right, some of the schools send vans to pick up kids there, and the summer camps. And sometimes, summer camps will pick up on the inbound side too, but the train station is actually a hub for sort of this, picking people up and dropping people off. So we gotta make it work.
But I think that both the traffic study and the market study would definitely be challenging because the current is moving down because of the current system.
It's a modeling. You model the bridge in place, you model the bridge out. You run the model in a couple of different ways. You model it if the traffic goes this direction, you model it if it goes that direction. Parking is secondary to the flow. Okay? Right? So whether you gain or lose 6 spaces is not going to be the only determinant of whether it's better or not to change the direction. So you need to include parking, but you need to create the scope so that you model the primary changes and then where it ripples back. For instance, it ripples back to another traffic. That's it. And this is what the traffic engineers do. And if you don't do it, if you do it piecemeal, you'll never get it.
Yeah, I want to express like deep skepticism. It's a lot of it is, some traffic engineering is real and some of it is just make believe. And, and essentially,
Bad experience.
no, it's just, catering to the, what does the automobile need to feel like it's not being impeded? Like our one little traffic light intersection with the bridge out and stuff, I don't know. It doesn't seem like there's no through movement in this large volumes of through movement. The tunnel though, the Wynwood situation, that's a technical problem. Because if there is enough traffic there that, essentially a traffic light and a signalized intersection like that has a carrying capacity whereafter, you begin to get congestion, delay, right? And the delay is measured in seconds and minutes. It's not probably much more than that. But, so if we were to pursue a one-way, a reversible flow tunnel, we are likely reduced. We'd have to calculate what, if any, is the reduction in capacity of the tunnel. And the real question is how often do you ever even use that capacity versus what you gain? So, I'll put it out there, the study that you would spend a lot of money for would say, well, if you do this design, assuming it works at all, the tunnel can move, 800 cars an hour, right? But peak hour is 1,500 cars. So you'd say, well, it's not going to work. And you'd say, or maybe the other 700 people can go around to the bridge, a mile away, so that we can have a frickin' sidewalk under the railroad. I don't know, but it's the notion that they can model Narberth, it's there's not that much traffic and stuff is always changing.
I don't know, I really don't understand what you're saying, but I think you started to describe the elements of the scope that are needed in this study.
And also as a technical matter for the geometrics of this, the station square is a geometrics design problem. It's not like a traffic study. It's just, can I get my trash truck in and can I fit the parking in? And, it's a design problem, not an engineering problem.
And I think speaking to the idea of why we've mentioned parking, it's not that we need to study how much parking is needed and what the demand is for parking, but more, is there a net loss or gain of parking? I think is just more to address concerns that if we're removing 15 spaces from the circle, are we accommodating those spaces elsewhere in the borough? And I think that's more what we were envisioning when we, as a committee, talked about parking, not so much what is the current capacity for service of parking, if that makes sense.
Just so we are talking about multimodal in terms of this traffic stuff. If you don't reverse the direction, and I'm not saying one way or the other, you need to study to decide that, but the Greenway is scheduled to come through the borough. Right now, to get it to run on Hackathon, you need to have a contraflow level. Yeah, you can't run against the traffic, which takes out all the new parking that we just said. So you do need the traffic study. It needs to be comprehensive. And not all traffic studies at the same time.
You've never seen a bad traffic study? Seriously?
No, I have, the roundabout.
It's the traffic studies that, I mean, it's the traffic studies are used also to justify like all these road widenings, and I mean, it's just, I mean, and then meanwhile, like, what I'm waiting for is the analysis that says things like, well, on Montgomery Avenue, we have no embayed left turn lanes. Right, we have a cross section, so we're like that's the traffic study I'm waiting for, is like to modernize for safety and efficiency.
I'm getting off point.
Yeah, but we have a limited amount of money though, right, to spend.
And Todd, real quick, I looked back at the parking study from 2017. It did include utilization for lots and for the downtown lots, so it wasn't just the residential.
So I think what we can kind of say for sure that there are a couple of issues that these concepts raise: improving access to the tunnel, changing the street directions as a means of improving access, and the impact of removing spaces from Station Circle. All of which potentially need a bit more technical study, but I don't think tonight we're into all what the scope of that study is. So let's just say that needs to be there. If that's okay with you all, without being able to exactly say what the proper scope should be. Are you all in agreement? Yep. Yeah. Adam, that comes from someone who's equally skeptical, having sit through many traffic analysis and innovation. I agree with you. I do think we should say that it needs to be looked at in some way. It feels to me that, so let's take each park. Let's take Ellsworth Park. Is everyone fairly satisfied with that? Or the things that you feel need to be looked at more carefully?
I'm satisfied that that's an optimal approach to go for. Elm Park its function is pretty clear, and its only deficit is access. It will be lightly used, but people will find a way to use it appropriately, and I think a lot of reading will be done there, and card playing will be done there, and bird watching.
Any other comments, Tom?
Yeah, I agree. I just think the access in the near term is safe. Guardrail lighting.
Then I'd like to suggest as it evolves that the nature, path surfaces and extending. But I think it's a conceptual thing. All right, let's move to Station Circle. What are folks' thoughts about? Is that folks satisfied with that template? Do you feel there's areas that need to be considered more strongly?
I'll speak. I think, given that we've acceded to the requests of the commercial community that parking be replaced, the 15 spaces that are currently in the circle there be somehow replaced in the business district, not necessarily in the circle, because parking in the circle is not probably the best place for somebody who's shopping up the other end of the street. But we've agreed that some parking needs to be found, begged, borrowed, or stolen somewhere up and down the street. So this is one way of doing it. It leaves a significant amount of real estate for the social uses of the plaza. And people can still park there and run in and get their pint of vodka, which is important. That's what the state store is all about, after all.
There's also a children's bookstore. You go right to the booze, but you know, I'm just
That's right.
that's because you're observing, but you
That's
know.
not mainly who parks there.
Yeah.
So as a long time observer of the scene there, I know what I've seen.
Okay.
Okay. So I think this scheme is given those circumstances is pretty much optimized.
I think, compromise means that no one's going to be 100% happy. Parking, no parking. What I've noticed in some, let's say, European piazzas, that sometimes you can park there and sometimes you can't. And maybe it can be designed in a way that we can close it off from time to time, but it doesn't have to have curves and, I don't know, maybe it's designed in a way that it doesn't look like a parking lot. It looks like a piazza that you're allowed to park in every once in a while. So I don't know.
Well, remember that the original concept that came out of the 2022 charrettes was that the circle and the street, all the way across to the facade of the stores on the north side, was treated as a square, as a plaza, and that cars were allowed to cross it, but they were not celebrated in that space. It's a pedestrian people space. And we need to, the concept of this space is that it include the street, that feel like the street is part of the square. Again, very much like many European town squares where you the driver drive through it, understanding that you're invading the space that belongs to bicycles and pedestrians. And there's traffic calming devices to supplement. Partly it's the way it looks and feels. That's the ultimate goal. It doesn't really matter how big it is. The scheme that preceded this scheme is maybe too big, a little bit windswept, a little bit like Dilworth Plaza used to be downtown, A site for agoraphobia. It feels good.
You're saying, does this particular scheme feel too big, or does it feel?
No, this particular scheme feels okay.
Is that because?
If you didn't have quite so much parking, it would feel better. But a little bit of parking along that edge is not a bad thing. We're going to have a road there anyway. You have to. That's adding parking to the road that we have to have is kind of a no-brainer.
Other thoughts about this?
I think somebody at some point needs to design the train station. Maybe it's never going to happen. But
let's try and stick on.
No, because
what we're talking about today.
I am talking about what is today, because the design has the stage and it has the ramp, and that's what this is a big design. And so we need to have a long-term solution if we're aiming for a capital investment of this scale. The train station is what makes the whole dang thing work. It handles a lot of people every day. It brings a lot of people downtown. And even if they're not buying a quart of milk with every trip on the train, it forms the habit, right, of coming down here and keeping an eye out. So, we need accessibility.
What we're doing is we're looking at a concept.
Well, I know it's the master plan, but I thought we were is the design there? So I'm just saying, if we want to advance a capital project, to me, we talked a lot about the traffic circulation and the parking, and that's important, and materiality will be important, and all of these details will be important. But I'm just saying, that you may not, I don't know. And I'm not sure I'm not sure that it's as important to me in general as a concept, or that it has to be really over the top as a stage. Because right now we have a farmer's market that's set up there sometimes, right? We program it all the time with different things. And so I think that the key thing is is to have a blank canvas that people can work with that's adaptable. So I mean, we heard about power being available, for example. I mean, that would be an upgrade, but I don't want to like sort of lock ourselves in.
I don't think any of this stuff locks anybody into anything. I think all of this stuff is conceptual. It's rough. It is not a plan, to quote a famous politician. It is the concept.
I don't think that good.
Well, neither do I, but in this instance, it seems applicable and, given the nature of it.
So, Adam, I can see your concerns about the stage. That could also be just a phasing thing too. That could be a stage area, but its final resolution may be way down the road. If there's that roadway, we go to the station.
I guess I personally, life is short. Times are tumultuous. Let's get it done, right? So we never say phase two. Phase two is never, right? So let's try to see what we can get out of phase one, and if we're going to do something.
I mean, I think that to just have a way to end this conversation is to put that stage in, or to touch the canopy that's there, and to set. Half of it's on your property, half of it's on septic. Good news is, Amtrak. But the good news is that you can do phases, and the most important thing in that station right now is to get it in the ramp underneath. That can be done discreet. So don't stop progress because you don't have a design for a stage. That stage may end up being important. I think we're getting off track.
Just an idea.
And we've signaled, Borough Council, we sent a resolution of support to the state as well for resolving their funding woes and resolution of support for the reimagining regional rail. But a portion of the resolution that we sent to them had to do with extending our political branch to work with them on ADA improvements to this space specifically. The board sent us back a nice letter, so it's on the docket in terms of something that we have articulated that we would like the partners to watch. I think it's a good comment.
Well, I do. I feel like it would be good to convey a sense of priority. Like if in fact an important church remove is the ADA accessibility platform, I feel that somehow it ought to be called out, or in fact, work or somewhere. I honestly didn't get that. That was the most important thing. I must feel like that's a secret. So let out.
You can't go wrong by it.
Well, you also have a committee that's and I know that's another thing that I actually feel uncomfortable about is the way the street is treated. I understand that the street has to have a lot of functions, but it feels like it's parceled out, at least in this drawing, to create like one area for dropping people off, one area for in previous iterations we saw more of a traffic table, but now we see I feel like the curb line ought to be less specifically programmed. And they may be able to get more out of it. I'm not sure why. I cross that street twice a day, and I know how hard it is sometimes with cars speeding. I'm not sure why parking is at a premium. So much curb space is being given up to the street. I kind of feel like it needs another turn in terms of how that precious space along the street line is used and what tools are used to make the cars know that they're really in a pedestrian zone. It feels like we're getting the least of all those things, to be honest. In this
way to do that, I very well said. Best way to do that.
Not to beat a dead horse here, but I like the idea of circle. And in order to not re-engineer the traffic, a little bit.
I mean, if you go back to the other plan, maybe.
I think what we need to do is we need to say, we've got at least two different designs in our group. And both of them work as a table design. Whether you look at the line weight for the curve and say that's flush or whether it's raised, that's not an issue. So, and when you look at the amount of parking, well, would we scale back by going to parallel parking? But you're trying to make those decisions in a vacuum because you don't know how much you lose and where else you can gain. So the traffic study with parking will give you the data you actually need.
You think about this just as a diagram. What's in the bag? You've got a little parking, you've got an access drive to the back of the stores, some sitting space, you've got a large table that links together both sides of the street. Those are the elements of this. And only much more refined design is going to what's the right mix? That's correct.
I'm just trying to make it streets and direction.
Yeah, it's based on.
That's just the.
There's also, it's, there's this, how do I put this, like,
Can you capture that part, or can we move on then?
let's, in the interest of time, let's just keep going.
Okay, so let's move to Norman. Any thoughts about others? Zoom with the earlier sketches.
The like, what do you call it, the idea sketches, the versions. This is where we ended up.
Any suggestions here?
Remind me, so it does have pickleball now?
Yeah, so.
Just gotta have a sound wall around it to.
No, we're gonna provide quiet balls
They'll have to be checked out from on site.
from the library.
I wanna see and hear this.
The library could have the ability to check out paddle balls.
How does this keep strength? Certified or
I feel like it
suggestion?
captures comprehensively the majority of the comments and feedback that provided. I think that it, for the parts that were reviewed, it provides the maximum flexibility and modernization. And I think it provides the opportunity for change should another part be reviewed.
Once it gets the bathrooms out of the Girl Scout, so that they can't charge admission or whatever it is that they do.
I mean, it preserves a lot of things that people like, and in doing so probably also saves us some money, because it's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But for the things that are broke, let's fix those things. And I think, the idea that you can truly do this piecemeal and see results seems like a good idea.
So it's incrementally achievable.
Right.
is another way of putting it. Decide was the honest thing. And the fact that the other thing later.
Yeah, it's
You
pieces.
still play baseball. You keep. You still play basketball. So those two things are not in danger.
But we could also, I mean, we could do it in, as projects, and maybe we do a lot of projects at once. I mean, it depends on what the funding is, right?
Right. Sure. Any thoughts about Dave's suggestion about urging us to look at things more comprehensively, to really, before long, or look at Seabright Avenue, look at the buildings and facilities the borough has, as well as the spaces, is part of the neighborhood.
But then,
Sorry.
go ahead.
My concern is just the duration of time. I feel like we're opening a can of worms if we try to have an that is nowhere close to being ready for assessment. And so I'd rather almost end up with duplicates in two different spaces. Because if Sabine takes 5 years to get off the ground, this could be halfway done. So I'd rather not sit on doing work to improve the facilities that we can improve on right now in order to maybe be able to change it in the future. Because if we do end up doing it grant by grant, project by project, there will be flexibility as you approach a threshold. And I think that there is a push at our council to assess Sabine sooner rather than later. So it's not that we're not going to be discussing it soon. I just don't think that the timeline. And so I'd rather see 2 sets of pickleball courts and 2 playgrounds.
So one question for y'all, is part of your scope to develop phasing ideas, or is it to, like, certain components of this park may maybe the closer to the end of their functional lifespan? Is that part of the assessment or the documentation?
I mean, so the recommendations for implementation in terms of phasing, that will definitely be part of it, and we will consider what things are at the end of their life when making the suggestions. We're not doing, we won't have a document that says this has 5 more years by any means. Just kind of speaking to Dave's idea, I think the one thing that, and maybe I have a different point of view because I always arrive by the parking lot because I'm not a local. But having the public works be your welcoming to the park if you're arriving by car is something that to me is a little problematic in this parking lot. And I don't think the parking lot is the first thing you need. It's probably the last thing you tackle here in some ways. But any consideration that if you have facilities that may stay at Sabine, if public works has a better home, I think that's something to consider from a borough asset.
You've been advised to that, to improve. So when the bleachers are falling apart, when you see baseball, that seems like a priority. When your playground is not compliant to the modern standards, you know where you want to put it, and it's not going to serve on the ball field, that seems like it can be a really good priority. So those are, that will take you a couple of years to do both of those. By the time you include funding and design, and you start again. And that, during that time, you're not just not planning, you're thinking, what do we do next 2 years? And your priorities might change a little. And that's the way that.
Yeah.
I think this planning process has added tremendous value for this park, for all of them, but because it instead of just, it's organized everyone's thinking, I think personally.
All right, well, I think what I'm going to have to do is, I made notes, but I'm going to have to listen to the tape again. And then also connect them to Automation. Sorry. Sorry we kept you so long. I hope we can work with that.
Very valuable.
Thank you.
Yeah, really good.
Thank you for all your time.
We do appreciate all the work. And what I'd like to say is we have 2 more items that are agenda by proposed meeting. Joe. This is not a whole lot to report anyway. Unless there's anything else, good public lap. So,